Welcome to the debate. Today we're tackling a really severe crisis in American corrections, the systemic failures inside Alabama's men's prisons. It's a situation the Department of Justice has detailed extensively, citing things like unconstitutional levels of violence, severe overcrowding, and just major policy breakdowns all across the system. The material we're looking at paints a picture of a state failing, frankly, to protect incarcerated people from violence, from sexual abuse, where the physical buildings themselves are dangerously inadequate. And the economic costs, they're just staggering. So the central question that really emerges from all this, the core of the debate for reform is this: does the best path forward, the effective remedy, lie mainly in the state pouring massive amounts of money into new, modern buildings? Like the huge $1.25 billion construction plan. Or does it demand a really radical overhaul of the systemic policies, especially the ones that control who gets incarcerated, for how long, and crucially, the mechanisms for release? My position is essentially this: the new infrastructure plan is the necessary first step. We have to address the immediate physical and operational failures that the federal lawsuit pointed out, those Eighth Amendment violations. You've got to stabilize the environment, provide basic constitutional conditions before any other kind of policy or programming reform can really take root and succeed.
And I see it quite differently. While yes, the physical conditions are clearly appalling, nobody denies that, I argue that focusing on this massive capital investment is, well, not just financially extravagant, but it's ultimately counterproductive. Why? Because it fundamentally fails to get at the political and policy root causes of the crisis. Building these huge new facilities, which critics have, I think rightly called a modernized cage, is really just treating the symptoms of mass incarceration. For me, the core problem lies in frankly, the collapse of the parole system and a deeply broken internal culture within the corrections department. So what we actually need is systemic policy reform. We need to focus on safely reducing the present population and implementing rehabilitation models that actually work.
Okay, I see why you'd frame it that way, but let me offer a perspective that's really grounded in the immediate crisis of safety and honestly human dignity that's happening right now. The DOJ complaint, it explicitly detailed unsafe physical facilities. The material shows prisons like Staten running at something like 265% capacity, Kilby 195%. This kind of extreme overcrowding is undeniably one of the main drivers of the violence, the sexual abuse that led the DOJ to find Eighth Amendment violations. The state's correctional agency, ADOC, the Alabama Department of Corrections, they have a constitutional duty to provide a safe environment. So the new construction, like the Elmo specialized men's facility you mentioned, it's essential just to provide that baseline safety. But look, it's not just about warehousing people. This new $1.25 billion facility, it's designed as a multi-use hub. It includes about 700 dedicated beds specifically for medical and mental health care. That addresses a critical, ongoing need that the old, crumbling infrastructure just physically cannot support. And furthermore, the plan does incorporate what I see as vital rehabilitative components. We're seeing the rollout of these personal education devices, PEDs they call them, which are basically secure tablets that provide digital educational materials, re-entry resources, right into the hands of the incarcerated population. The new structure is also designed to house essential vocational training programs, things like welding, HVAC, taught by Ingram State Technical College. So it's this multi-pronged approach, combined with, importantly, substantial pay raises for correctional officers, aimed at tackling that huge staff turnover problem. That's how ADOC is trying to stabilize the whole system at once.
That's a compelling case for the physical necessity, I grant you that. But have you really considered let's say, the economic and political context of this spending? The sheer extravagance of it, dedicating $400 million in federal COVID relief funds to build prisons. That seems to demonstrate, well, shockingly misplaced priorities. And the human and economic costs of just maintaining this broken system are enormous. You've got $17.4 million paid out just in legal settlements and fees for excessive force claims against officers between 2020 and 2024 alone. That's millions of taxpayer dollars, not going towards reform, but essentially managing the legal fallout from bad staff behavior. The real crisis, I maintain, is rooted in policy choices, not a lack of bricks and mortar. The state has actively, deliberately ignored the clearest and, frankly, the most fiscally responsible way to solve overcrowding: fix the parole system. The parole board's grant rate just plummeted. It hit a staggering low of 8% in 2023. You simply cannot solve 265% overcrowding if you've effectively slammed the door shut on the way out. This policy failure traps thousands of people who are eligible for parole in those same overcrowded, dangerous prisons you just described.
I understand the urgency around the policy failures, believe me. But how do you stabilize an environment when the physical crisis is just so acute? For any rehabilitation program to actually function, for those PDEs or the vocational training to even happen, you first need control. You need basic safety. The DOJ report highlighted raw sewage backing up, crumbling buildings, lack of visibility for officers, conditions that actively foster violence. Building facilities designed for modern supervision, for direct observation, it seems to me it's a precondition for changing behavior, not somehow an alternative to it.
See, I'm not convinced by that logic, because the building approach seems fatally flawed as long as it neglects the cause of the overcrowding. And that cause is politically driven decisions to keep people locked up longer. We saw a really stark example of policy regression just recently. The parole board adopted new guidelines that actually make release even tougher. The revised scoring formula significantly increases the weight given to the original crime. For instance, they added a very high offense level that scores 4 points right off the bat. And crucially, they lowered the score needed for a recommended parole grant from a maximum possible score of 7 down to just 5. So what does that mean? It means for someone who committed a serious crime maybe decades ago, even if they have a perfect record inside, completed programs, got job training, have strong support, the basic arithmetic of the score makes it almost impossible to hit that new lower threshold of 5 points. We saw this documented in the material with cases like Thomas, a man who served over 30 years, had stellar conduct, 19 letters of recommendation, denied parole, and then set off, meaning he can't even be considered again for 5 full years. That kind of policy regression actively undermines any relief the new buildings might theoretically offer.
Okay, while that low grant rate is, yes, clearly counterproductive if the goal is population management, the new construction does provide necessary, immediate relief from those unconstitutional conditions. That's the point the DOJ keeps making. The new facilities are designed to improve safety by allowing better separation of the population and by providing specific, dedicated spaces for programming that just don't exist now. You mentioned the staggering economic impact of the lawsuits, the settlements. My argument is that accountability and safety require stable, professional staff, and they need to be working in facilities that actually allow for effective management. ADOC has established a use of force review board in 2024 to monitor trends and review incidents. That's at least a step toward internal accountability. And addressing the massive staff vacancy rates, over 50% in some prisons, that is absolutely critical for safety. The substantial pay raise that passed last year, well, it's finally starting to stabilize officer numbers, slowly. Stabilized staff can then, hopefully, enforce policy effectively in newer facilities designed for easier, safer supervision. We have to fix the physical environment and the staffing crisis alongside any parole reform.
Stabilizing staff is vital, I absolutely agree. But accountability is just fundamentally undermined when you see officers who were named in high-profile fatal incidents like Roderick Gadsden, involved in the beating death of Stephen Davis, when those officers are documented as being promoted, despite the state paying out millions in settlements for 94 excessive force lawsuits in just 4 years. That fosters what can only be described as a deeply entrenched culture of impunity. And the material, especially the reporting that came out around the Alabama Solution documentary, it portrays this vividly. That documentary used actual videos and phone calls from incarcerated men themselves to expose not just the squalid conditions, but maybe more importantly, the systemic abuse by some officers. When the culture itself is broken, simply putting officers in a shiny new building doesn't fix the underlying mechanism of abuse. And let's not just glide past the scale here. $125 billion for one prison facility, a facility larger than many county seats in the state.
all while the core policy failure, the ridiculously low parole rate, is actively driving the very crisis that supposedly necessitates the building. That money should be funding comprehensive diversion programs, mental health treatment, robust re-entry support, things happening outside the prison walls.
And that really brings us to the core philosophical difference here, doesn't it? The nature of reform itself. Is it about investing first in physical capacity and safety, or is it about fundamentally overhauling the incentive structure for the people inside?
Precisely. Because the state's current mega prison plan, it just offers a modernized cage, essentially. Real meaningful reform has to incorporate a proactive incentive-based model, something that actually motivates rehabilitation and offers a clear, graduated pathway back to the community. The theoretical model that's often discussed, sometimes called the Alabama solution conceptually, it proposes a 4-level system: revive, rebuild, renew, and reinforce. The idea is to promote rehabilitation by directly tying levels of privilege and improved living conditions to positive behavior. So, for example, in the renew stage, good conduct could be rewarded with things like 2-person rooms, maybe in facilities without traditional bars. And maybe most importantly, it allows people to earn actual living wages through work programs inside. This would enable them to build savings, maybe $12,000, hypothetically, by the time they're released, and also allows them to pay restitution to victims. That's an incentive structure that fundamentally tackles recidivism and the prison culture by offering earned success. That's entirely different from typical U.S. prison reform, which tends to focus mainly on punishment, or maybe some educational programs, but without that direct link between behavior and improved conditions or earning potential.
For long-term change. But the practical reality, the immediate legal and moral imperative facing the state right now, is that it first has to get control of the massive physical violence that is endemic in the current system. The systemic failure is so profound that the old infrastructure itself actually facilitates brutality. We have DOJ data showing prisoner-on-prisoner sexual assaults increased dramatically between 2015 and 2017. We're talking about incidents where inmates are stabbed, beaten unconscious, even having foreign objects surgically removed from their bodies. That's the grim reality born from failed infrastructure and extreme overcrowding. The new facility, with its focus on modern design, better physical separation, the vocational training, the enhanced mental health care, it's designed specifically to try and contain that violence, to separate different populations, and address the core failures that simply must be fixed before any complex, graduated, incentive-based system like the one you described could possibly function safely. The new campus style is what allows us to actually deliver those GED and HVAC programs you support in a reasonably safe environment.
But I would argue that delivering those programs in a state that simultaneously refuses to grant parole to deserving individuals demonstrates a massive misalignment of incentives. Why should someone work hard to train for a welding job when a politically influenced parole board ensures they're likely to remain trapped regardless of their efforts? The whole system is fundamentally broken at the policy level. And while yes, new buildings might alleviate some of the physical squalor that the material exposes, the overall strategy feels like an incredibly expensive Band-Aid. It refuses to correct the fundamental policy defects, that abysmal parole rate which perpetually refills the prisons, and the culture of impunity among some staff which just perpetuates the cycle of violence and sky-high costs.
I still maintain that the massive infrastructure investment was, unfortunately, unavoidable given the sheer severity of the unconstitutional conditions and the level of violence that have plagued the system for years. The human toll of that physical crisis, the stabbings, the sexual assaults, the deaths, it demanded an immediate structural response. The new mega facility, along with initiatives like the PDs, they are essential components of a multifaceted strategy. The goal is to modernize the system, provide a safer environment where rehabilitation programs can finally function effectively, and hopefully offer inmates the skills they actually need for successful reentry one day.
That the policy priority really reveals the state's true intent, doesn't it? By prioritizing a construction budget of $1.25 billion over policy changes that could safely reduce the prison population now, the state seems to be demonstrating a preference for simply locking people up longer. This risks making the expensive new facilities functionally obsolete, almost the moment they open, because they'll likely be quickly refilled by the very same policies that drove the original crisis. The financial cost is, as we've said, staggering, and the human cost, the continued denial of earned freedom to rehabilitated individuals, is, I think, ethically unacceptable.
It's clear the material presents two very different, yet arguably compelling perspectives on where Alabama's resources and political focus must be directed to achieve lasting constitutional compliance and genuine change in its crisis-ridden prisons. The path forward really demands an answer to whether new infrastructure can truly enable reform, or if perhaps that infrastructure merely enables the continuation of deeply flawed policies.